thank you so much for joining us here on Border Report Live. I'm Daniel Marin, a news anchor at KXAN in Austin. This is our show where we take a deep dive on what's happening on the southern border with our team of experienced on-the-ground correspondents from borderreport.com. And this week we are joined by Julian Resendiz in El Paso, Texas. We also have Sandra Sanchez covering South Texas for us. First off, though, we're going to start with a bit of breaking news when it comes to the border. This just within the last hour or so of this taping. The Pentagon is going to be using hundreds of military lawyers to serve as immigration judges to help with the backlog of cases. So Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has approved sending up to 600 military lawyers to the Justice Department to serve as these temporary immigration judges. This is all according to a memo that was reviewed by the Associated Press. Now, they also report that the military will begin sending groups of 150 attorneys, both military and civilians, to the Justice Department as soon as practicable, it says right here, and that the military services should have their first round of people identified by next week. This is all according to that memo, again, obtained by the AP, dated on August 27th. Now, some other news that we are covering, also developing right now, a judge has ruled that President Trump's use of the National Guard in California is illegal. This was a kind of scathing ruling from U.S. District Judge Charles Breyer, actually pretty scathing, in San Francisco. He noted that Trump and Defense Secretary Hegseth have stated their intention to deploy the National Guard troops to other cities across the country, including we've seen them in Oakland and San Francisco. The judge says that raises concerns that they are creating a, quote, a national police force with the president as its chief, end quote. Now, the judge didn't require that the 300 remaining troops be withdrawn from California, but he did point out that they received improper training. He's also ordered Trump's Republican administration to stop using them to execute laws. He also set the order to go into effect on September 12th. Bit more news for you. Baltimore, there was an immigration protest, this having to do with deportation flights. So some demonstrators gathered at BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport. This was on Sunday. They're calling for an end to deportation flights. That's because Avelo Airlines there has contracted to operate these flights for the Department of Homeland Security. So these protesters that were out there, you can see them carrying signs, letting their voices be heard about the airline's role in the flights. They want the state to cut ties with the airlines, with Avelo. Now, organizers say that thousands of Marylanders have already signed petitions backing this demand. And by the way, the airline began these flights back in May, and Avelo said that the agreement with ICE is a long-term chapter program is what they're calling it. We also had something happen over the weekend in the Harlingen area in regards to deportation flights. So let's go ahead and bring in our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez. And Sandra, explain to us what happened over the weekend.
Over the weekend, a couple plane loads that were loaded with children who had come across the border here in South Texas unaccompanied. They're called unaccompanied migrant children, were loaded onto these planes, and ICE was about to fly them to Guatemala City, the capital of Guatemala. And then there were some lawsuits that were filed, and actually a judge in Washington, D.C., in high drama kind of overnight on early Sunday morning stopped the deportation flights. Now, here's a shot we have from KBEO of the flights waiting on the tarmac. We understand the children were there for a few hours. They had been loaded onto the planes. The controversy comes because some migrant advocacy groups filed lawsuits to stop the planes from leaving on behalf of the children, saying that they had no one to meet them in Guatemala and that their lives were threatened, that they could fall to the hands of gangs or, traffickers, people that they didn't know. I have to say, the Guatemalan Foreign Affairs Minister Carlos Martinez said Friday, in anticipation of this happening, that the Guatemalan government told the United States it's willing to accept back hundreds of Guatemalan children who were labeled unaccompanied minors. Keep in mind, these children, when they come across the border after they are interviewed initially by Customs and Border Protection, they are put in the custody of Health and Human Services, HHS, under the Office of Refugee and Resettlement. And because of their age, we as journalists are not allowed to inquire about them. We have really no information on them. What we will see occasionally is when we go to see these deportation flights, we will see children being boarded, sometimes alone, sometimes with women at the start of the planes. They always load the what's so-called vulnerable populations first. But In this case, the Associated Press was tipped off that this was happening. There's a U.S. Senator out of Oregon, Ron Wyden, and he had he had posted a letter to HHS saying, you can't deport these children. Ron Wyden, excuse me, Democrat from Oregon, he said that if he, quote, this move threatens to separate children from their families, lawyers, and support systems to thrust them back into the very conditions they are seeking refuge from, and to disappear vulnerable children beyond the reach of American law and oversight. So you have two sides to it. Some people are saying these children were trying to be disappeared. Others were saying they weren't being deported, they were being repatriated. And those are two very different legal terms.
And Sandra, do you have any idea how often these flights are occurring, particularly with the children?
Yeah, we were able to track ICE air flights for a while, but they've started changing tail numbers and doing some of these flights in secret. And you never know how many children are on a flight unless you actually are at the airport just kind of filming. I've been kicked out a bunch of times for doing that. Usually, and I think we have some video kind of shows a little bit of how this goes down. Buses will pull up and they'll block any view of now this one was a formal deportation flight. This was in May of 2023, right after, right when Title VIII was re-implemented. And you can see the children, they go first. ERO is there securing.
What does ERO stand for people who are unfamiliar?
What does ERO stand for? Julian, I forgot really quickly. Office of
Enforcement and Removal Operations.
Enforcement and Removal Operations.
Sorry to put you on the spot right there, Sandra.
There's so many acronyms.
Sure.
Another reporter described it the other day as alphabet soup of acronyms. ORRERO. Yeah.
That's the federal government.
So Enforcement Removal Operations. The people are they're frisked. They are shackled if they're single adults. Usually we'll get there before dawn. We'll be on the tarmac waiting with cameras in hand, and you can hear the sound of the shackles being laid down on the tarmac. And then they just have this this process that they obviously do a lot of, and the adults are quickly frisked, shackled, and then I've counted most of the times it's like 17 steps leading up to the planes, and they're loaded on and they take off. Oftentimes if we're there and we try to film and we don't have permission from ICE, they will bring buses or something onto the tarmac to block our view. So what we're seeing here is video footage that we obtained with ICE actually taking us out there. They wanted to show us that they were sending people back right when Title VIII was implemented. The Biden administration was trying to show that they were taking a harder stance against immigration and pathways to coming here.
Was that the last time that at least you were invited and cameras were invited?
It was the last time that I was invited. Yeah, it was actually. And there had been a lot of calls. I know Congressman Cuellar and several other leaders had said, one thing we're not doing is showing people that we're sending them back. We've always been sending them back, he would say. And he did this kind of all-out effort and push, why doesn't the administration show what we're doing? And then they started having more of these invites, so more access.
All right, well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so right now there's about 2,500 children in Office of Refugee Resettlement custody. They could either be in migrant shelters, they could be in foster facilities, but they are under the care of Health and Human Services. One of the lawsuits out of Arizona filed by the Florence Immigrant and Refugee Project said to stop these deportation flights, said that on board was a 12-year-old asylum seeker who had a chronic kidney disease and needed dialysis and actually needed a kidney transplant, did not want to be sent back to Guatemala. There was also a 10-year-old boy and his 3-year-old sister. They were alleging that they had no one to pick them up and that they didn't have any family left there, and they worried what would happen to them. So, a lot of two very different sides to this story, but what we know is the planes were stopped, and a couple judges have said they may not continue unless these children have due process, unless these children go through formal immigration hearings, which is under the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act that was passed in 2008 under George W. Bush administration, which ensures that children, other than Mexican children or Canadian children, go through a formal legal immigration process. So unless they have deportation orders, they cannot be sent back.
Sticking with this topic of the minors, Sandra, I wanted to bring up something that we were talking about before the show, this new AP reporting you were telling me about, that the parents of unaccompanied minors, a new rule maybe that they might have to come to the U.S. to pick up their children. Is that correct?
Yeah, once again, Associated Press today is reporting that there was a new policy memo issued by ORR, Office of Refugee Resettlement, saying that parents have to go in person to request their children or the legal guardian, and then they can be interviewed by immigration authorities. Now, this sets families up who may not be here, who legally, for going in the presence of ICE officials. And there's a lot of fear. There are some reports that some families have been arrested and sent back in this process. I have called ORR and HHS, written to them, asked them for information. Is this policy in effect? If so, why are you doing this? What is the goal? Is this affecting other families? Is ICE collaborating? Could people be told, you could be arrested, are ICE officials being told, go to this courtroom, this is going to be this hearing, but they have not responded to me.
Okay. All right, Sandra. Well, thank you very much. We got to take a quick break. We will be right back with more Border Report Live. Welcome back to Border Report Live. So when many people come to the U.S. and they are undocumented, and then they begin to work and they begin to earn money, maybe sometimes under the table, a lot of these people, they do send the money back to Mexico to family there and loved ones who are there who depend on that money. And the Mexican government kind of depends on that money too in a certain way. Let's go ahead and bring in Julian Resendiz, because Julian, you have some reporting right now that the money, the amount of money that's headed from the U.S. back into Mexico from those who are undocumented, that's going down, right?
Yes, Daniel, that's a trend that we started to see late last year as the record flow of remittances, which last year, 2024, was in excess of $64.7 billion, started to slow down. Now, you're right, the Mexican economy depends on this money, which is equivalent to about 3.5% of Mexico's gross domestic product. And where this money goes is it goes into some of the poorest states in Mexico, because that's where some of the migrants who came to the United States to work come from. So in a way, that money kind of keeps people in those communities because their relatives are working, sending money, hence they have no more need to try to migrate. Now there's a graphic that shows the dramatic drop that remittances have experienced since January. If you see there, it's almost a $2 billion drop in that 7-month period. Now, there's a couple of explanations being put on the table, including by the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum. She went on social media on August 22nd, and she pretty much blamed all this on the fear that Mexicans are experiencing, Mexican workers are experiencing in the U.S. that's kind of keeping them from going to the bank and sending money, from going to Western Union, Walmart, all those places where you can turn cash into electronic money that goes into Mexico. So a lot of that blame is falling on the hardline immigration policies of the Trump administration, which, according to many, is keeping people who are still working from sending money, from going out, and in some cases from showing up to work on any given day. Now I mentioned that there's an alternate. There's a couple of alternate explanations. Another one has to do with the slowdown in migration of Mexican nationals. And this is not new. This has been going on for at least the past couple of years. We didn't notice it because of the post-COVID-19 pandemic economic recovery in the US. Everybody was back to work. Everybody was had overtime. Everybody was sending more money back home to Mexico. Now, since the US economy is now not booming anymore, it's kind of at a standstill pattern. So that kind of is the alternate explanation why the money flow is starting to slow from Mexico.
And the president there in Mexico, Sheinbaum, she did say, though, that Mexico is still on, I think she said, strong footing when it comes to their economy. But still, this is a lot of money that they're missing out on.
Yeah, the job of a chief executive is to inspire confidence. So obviously, there's all kinds of way of spinning what's going on. Yeah, but to be fair, yes, the Mexican economy has other factors that hold it together, including tourism, including foreign investment, which she says has not slowed down despite the tariffs, despite the immigration policies in the U.S. There's still confidence in Mexico, she says, and investment is kind of growing. Now, something else I can tell you about this, Daniel, is that the amount of the remittances is kind of holding steady. Like I said, people are not going as frequently out to send money home. The other interesting factor is how those remittances are getting home. The biggest drop we have seen is in those electronic transfers that I mentioned, where you have to physically show up at a bank, physically show up at a place, at a business that sends transfer cash into electronic money. So that is down. However, the amount of the number and amount of money orders, cash that you go into a Circle K or a 7-Eleven and you turn into a paper document and you can actually snail mail that home, that has actually increased. So this kind of gives credence to the theory that this may have to do with the fears of immigration raids and being picked up on the street.
And to that point, in your reporting, you say that a lot of people, or not some people, I should say, some people aren't necessarily convinced that this is all because of President Trump.
That's correct. Like I mentioned, and they're saying that it has to do more with the slowdown in Mexicans integrating into the U.S. economy, working more than them going out to the stores and sending the money home. There's actually a document that I found in my reporting that it shows that this is a phenomenon affecting Mexico mostly. In other words, Nicaragua, even places in Central America are still getting as much remittances as they used to. And in fact, some of the international organizations are predicting that remittances to Central America, to most of Central American countries, are going to go up by 2% this year. So that in turn gives credence to the alternate theory that this has to do with the slowdown in the number of Mexicans integrating into the U.S. economy and previously sending those record amounts of money home.
Is it all about integration, do you think, or is it also just the numbers have dropped also of people arriving in the U.S. from Mexico?
Well, one thing has to do with the other. In order to integrate, you have to come in. So it's mostly in the slowdown in migration from Mexico to the U.S. Down here in El Paso, even though the numbers are low, most of the migrants that try to make it across the border wall are from Mexico, but most of them are not making it. And that was not true up until a year ago.
Right, Julian, thank you very much for that. We got to take one more quick break. We'll be back with more Border Report Live. Welcome back to Border Report Live, I should say. DHS seems to be sweetening the pot when it comes to trying to get states and local law enforcement to cooperate with ICE operations. I have a news release here that says DHS has announced new reimbursement opportunities for state and local law enforcement who partner with ICE to arrest, quote, the worst of the worst criminal illegal aliens. And they say that the funding is coming from President Trump's big, beautiful bill. Let's go ahead and bring in Julian and Sandra once again. For whoever who wants to take this question, is this enough to maybe try and get those on board, those skeptical law enforcement agencies who really don't want anything to do with ICE? Is this enough to maybe bring them along with what the president's trying to do here?
Well, I mean, they're up to almost 1,000 agreements for these 287G partnerships. So, they are, like you said, really trying to sweeten the pot. It's like a 600% increase. So paying salary and benefits for law enforcement that coordinate with these ICE removal operations is, throwing money at it, certainly, I believe, is going to entice more law enforcement agencies. Julian?
I would say that is true to a large degree, but like I mentioned in previous shows, some places they firmly have a stand on where they stand on immigration. So, for instance, here in El Paso County, which is deep blue, I don't anticipate that any sort of economic enticement is going to change people's minds. The same is probably holding true in red counties. I think the incentive is going to make him rush to be part of this.
And just to get into the specifics from this news release here, so the plan is law enforcement agencies will be eligible for quarterly monetary performance awards as well. So bonuses based on the successful location of illegal aliens, their word, provided by ICE, and overall assistance to further ICE's mission to defend the homeland. So here are the numbers, though. 90 to 100% success rates. That's $1,000 for each officer. 80 to 89%. That's $750, and then it goes down to $500 for a 70 to 79% success rate. So the big, beautiful bill, remind us, Sandra, a lot of that, there's a lot of border funding in that bill.
Well, there is, and you also remember there's now $50,000 bonuses for joining ICE. We had over the weekend there was an ICE job fair in Abilene, Texas, and there was 3,000 people showed up because $50,000. It's over a period of time. It's not just you sign it and you get $50,000. That's a lot of money that can change a lot of families. But the idea of giving this amount of award for capturing someone like this and this an amount of award is really, I think, going to raise the ire of a lot of civil rights organizations. Pinning people like this. We're going to pay you this if you get this person and you get that person. I think there will be a lot of criticism to this. Whether the administration cares or not, that's yet to be seen.
Yeah, Julian, what do you
There
think?
there has already been a lot of criticism. I know here in El Paso, almost every immigration advocate has come out against this. But I do have to make one precision. The big beautiful bill calls for the hiring of Border Patrol agents, a lot of them, and those will be stationed here on the border communities like ours, like the Rio Grande Valley, like San Diego. The ICE agents, that's another story. Most of those ICE agents are going to be going to big cities in Middle America, and that's where the rest of the country is going to feel the effect.
Yeah, but you remember we've been talking about this has been going to happen in the interior, right? Well, just recently here in the Valley, we had massive ICE raids last week. And so about 100 of people arrested. So they are going to get the border areas as well. And some of these agents obviously could be stationed here too.
All right, let's go ahead as we begin to wrap things up here. Let's go ahead and check in with anything you're working on. Julian, what are you working on right now for borderreport.com, aside from the reporting you've had today?
Yes, I'm about to go across the border. We want to check out the situation at the migrant shelters. The last time we reported, they were a quarter full. Now we're getting unconfirmed reports that some of them have closed altogether because of the lack of newly arrived migrants seeking entry into the United States. And also because some of the people who came here in January and decided to stay, see if things change, saw that things didn't change, and maybe they also went back home.
Julian, while I have you, I haven't talked to you in a bit, my friend. You had reported the Mount Cristo Rey out there in El Paso and the Sunland Park area that they were going to start adding border fence. Is there any movement on that project? Have you seen anything?
Not any physical construction that I have seen, and my family does live out there in Sunland Park, New Mexico, which is where Mount Cristo Rey is. But I'm sure that there's a lot of pre-planning going on, a lot of stuff that we probably don't get to see. But I'm sure that project is going to move forward.
All right, Sandra, what are you working on for borderreport.com?
Actually, I'm working on the 287G story that we just talked about, but I do have a story that posted over the weekend about a Honduran family. This is in line with what Julian was talking about. They're in Mexico, in Reynosa. They actually weren't allowed to go in the shelter there because their family had been threatened by human traffickers who wanted to sex traffic. They have two very lovely girls, a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old girl. A local nonprofit organization has found them a place to live, is trying to get them to Monterrey and raise some funds for them. But it's just astounding that the shelter won't let them in because they said, no, we don't want to entertain the cartel are going to follow. If they say that they want these girls, we're not having them in our facility and putting everyone else at risk. So I interviewed the head of the nonprofit, and you can read about that on borderreport.com.
And Daniel, and that goes to show you how the level of fear in Mexico,
sure.
Because of the cartel. Very few people in Mexico, other than law enforcement, occasionally stand up to the cartels. It's a reality that Mexican people and anybody passing through Mexico lives with.
And Sandra, I'm sure you have this in your reporting too, but does this happen often? What you just mentioned?
Um, yeah, it does. And what's shocking is usually they find them at the river and they take them to the shelter. In this case, the shelter rejected them, so they took them to the river camp, which is an even worse place to be. But now, like I said, they are off the streets. But the situation in Reynosa, which is just south of McAllen, is extremely dangerous, and the cartel are in control there.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of Border Report Live. For Julian Resendiz in El Paso and Sandra Sanchez in South Texas, I'm Daniel Marin. Thanks so much for joining us. We will see you tomorrow.